Okay, so check out this quote from President Trump. It really sets the stage for how this intense rhetoric around the US-Israel-Iran war is totally blurring the lines between a paused military conflict and, well, an ongoing global crisis. He recently joked about having an aircraft carrier stop by Cuba on the way home, kind of implying this decisive end to the whole Middle Eastern conflict. But as we're going to see when we actually parse through the data, the reality on the ground, and especially on the water, tells a profoundly different story.
So, it begs the question, right? How exactly is a supposedly paused war still reshaping the entire globe? Look, the direct exchanges of fire might have largely halted, and the White House even told Congress that hostilities are officially terminated, but when you look closely at today's live updates, man, it's a different picture. We have to explore how this incredibly fragile ceasefire is actively disrupting everything from global energy pipelines down to your summer vacation plans. The dust hasn't settled. It's honestly just blowing in new directions.
Welcome to DisExplainer on the May 2026 US-Israel-Iran war updates. Today, we're going to cut right through all that chaotic live blog noise to show you exactly how this geopolitical earthquake is spreading outward. By breaking down the raw data together, we'll strip away the confusion and uncover the structural realities of this massive standoff.
Here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the fragile ceasefire, then the choke point at the Strait of Hormuz, regional escalation, billions in arms, and finally, global shockwaves. Let's jump right in.
Section 1. The fragile ceasefire.
Now, while Washington claims hostilities have terminated, military leaders on both sides are singing a completely different tune. We're looking at perfectly contrasting realities here. On one side, the U.S. asserts it completely dismantled Iran's military capabilities, citing the use of B-2 bombers to stop nuclear ambitions and claiming Iran literally has no navy or air force left. But then, on the other side, Iranian sources claim they inflicted unprecedented damage on 16 key U.S. Gulf installations across 8 countries. They're saying major hubs like Camp Buehring in Kuwait were left heavily damaged and nearly deserted. It's wild. It's a total war of competing narratives, with both sides posturing like they're ready for round 2 at any second.
But stepping past all that political posturing for a second, the deadly reality of this paused war is captured by a deeply sobering number. 14. That's the number of Iranian Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps personnel recently killed in a tragic explosion. And they weren't even in active combat. They were killed while clearing unexploded ordnance across 1,200 hectares of threatened farmland in Zanjan province. To put that in perspective, that's why this matters so much to the everyday person living there. Even when the missiles stop flying, the ground itself is still a deadly hazard. It just goes to show that a ceasefire on paper absolutely doesn't translate to immediate peace on the ground.
All right, Section 2. Choke point. Strait of Hormuz.
The crucial point to understand here is that the U.S. naval blockade in the Gulf of Oman has squeezed an estimated $4.8 billion in vital oil revenue directly out of Iran's economy. The Pentagon has been strictly enforcing sanctions and curbing maritime trade just to weaken Iran's capacity to fund regional activities. I mean, $4.8 billion? That is a staggering amount of money just removed from the global energy market, and it acts as the primary pressure point in this entire standoff.
But, naturally, Iran has pushed back. In retaliation to this blockade, they've basically set up a giant toll booth system. They are demanding payments for passing ships to secure safe maritime passage right through the Strait of Hormuz, which, remember, is a waterway responsible for a full fifth of the world's global oil trade. The U.S. countered this by issuing severe sanction warnings to any global shipping firms that actually pay these tolls, whether they use cash or digital assets. And the result of this massive high-stakes game of maritime chicken? Global crude oil prices have spiked past $110 a barrel. So yeah, every single time you see a jump at the gas pump, you're feeling the direct ripple effect of this standoff.
To really wrap our heads around these massive numbers and the real-world logistics, just look at the crew of the India-linked tanker Sarv Shakti. Ship tracking data showed this vessel attempting a highly risky, rare transit carrying 45,000 tons of liquefied petroleum gas, basically cooking fuel. And they took it right through this heavily contested corridor. Passing right near Iran's Larak and Keshem Islands, this single ship perfectly encapsulates the insane pressure on regional energy flows right now. Everyday commodities are essentially having to navigate a war zone just to get where they need to go.
Section 3. Regional escalation and proxies. As the economic pressure really mounts at sea, the conflict is simultaneously accelerating a super high-tech regional arms race, pushing experimental technology straight onto the battlefield. For example, in a major display of defense cooperation, Israel rapidly deployed its prototype Iron Beam laser weapon to the United Arab Emirates. Guys, this system is straight out of science fiction. It is literally designed to vaporize incoming Iranian short-range rockets and drones using directed energy. Actually deploying prototypes directly to an ally like the UAE shows just how urgently these nations view the current threat.
And get this, they paired that laser tech with the Spectro surveillance system, which can detect incoming drone threats from up to 20 kilometers out. And man, it was desperately needed. According to reports, these systems successfully helped the UAE intercept a staggering barrage of over 500 ballistic missiles and 2,000 drones. Can you just imagine the sky filled with that level of ordnance? The fact that regional allies are openly sharing and integrating this level of advanced defense technology reveals a massive structural shift in Middle Eastern alliances.
Meanwhile, the proxy battles continue to rage violently on other fronts. Israel recently issued new forced displacement orders for several towns and destroyed 50 Hezbollah-linked sites in southern Lebanon, including command centers. Hezbollah, in turn, fired rockets and launched drone strikes using diving explosive devices against Israeli troops stationed there. So this absolutely proves the war is far from contained. The so-called ceasefire between the US and Iran, yeah, that hasn't translated into peace between their regional allies and proxies at all.
Section 4. Billions in arms and diplomacy.
Bypassing a congressional review by declaring a state of emergency, the U.S. State Department quickly approved $8.6 billion in arms sales. That's a huge number. This includes heavily fortifying Qatar with $4.01 billion for Patriot missile defense, Kuwait getting a $2.5 billion integrated battle command system, and supplying nearly $1 billion in precision weapons to Israel, plus another $147 million to the UAE. What we're seeing is Washington actively pouring billions into building an interconnected, heavily armed fortress across the Gulf and the Levant to deter future escalation. But despite all these massive military preparations, diplomacy is pretty much totally stalled. Iran actually did submit a new proposal for negotiations through mediators in Pakistan. However, President Trump remains unsatisfied with the terms, publicly casting doubt on whether an agreement can even be reached. Behind the scenes, he's privately weighing a prolonged naval blockade, one that could potentially last for months, just to forcefully curb Iran's oil exports and squeeze them into a denuclearization deal. Basically, the U.S. is banking heavily on economic suffocation over immediate military strikes.
Section 5. Global shockwaves.
Finally, let's step all the way back to see how this Middle Eastern standoff is directly altering lives everywhere else. Remember those shipping disruptions we talked about earlier? Well, they aren't just hurting big oil companies. They've caused an 18% spike in the cost of delivering UN humanitarian aid. Let that sink in for a second. Because the freight routes are choked up and dangerous, it is now 18% more expensive to send essential, life-saving supplies to vulnerable refugees across the Middle East and Africa. A geopolitical dispute over oil and nuclear capabilities is critically delaying food and medicine for the world's most vulnerable populations.
We're also seeing major geopolitical and economic shifts globally. The U.S. is actually pulling 5,000 troops out of Germany. That is a massive strategic pivot, driven partly by shifting global priorities and partly due to rising tensions with European allies over how to handle this very war. Meanwhile, on a microeconomic level, ordinary business owners in places like Dubrovnik, Croatia, fear that war-driven fuel costs and skyrocketing airfares are going to totally crush their crucial summer tourism season. A blockade in the Gulf of Oman literally means an empty hotel room in the Adriatic. It's wild to think about, but everything is connected.
Which leaves us with this final thought. We've seen the billions spent on lasers and missiles, the crippled shipping lanes, the skyrocketing aid costs, and the delicate proxy wars. Ultimately, with diplomacy stalled, supply chains choked, and proxy battles violently raging on the side, we really have to ask, how long can the world endure this volatile, heavily armed waiting game? If this is what a paused war looks like, what happens if play resumes? Keep a close eye on the Strait of Hormuz, and as always, keep learning.